So this is the 88 Bronco project. Basically, I went into, I'm going to fix the headliner on this, but while I'm doing that, I had a spot on the roof that I needed to fix. So most of those spots wound up just being paint peeling up, and it was not a big deal. There was a bubble in the paint. However, there was a rust spot in here. And so I wound up cleaning that piece out and making my patch piece to go in. So I went, and this is just bent out of 22 gauge sheet metal. The sheet metal they use on the truck is 22 gauge, or pretty close to that anyway. So you like to use the same size materials where you can. It makes it a lot easier. So we're going to I made this patch piece up to match the existing. That was a bit of a process to go through, and we're going to get everything cleaned up here and patch it in place. The cleanup is being done with roll-off discs. I weld through coating on the inside, and so I cleaned all the overspray off up here, polished it off, so we have good clean metal surrounding the area. To our patch piece, which is coated on the back side as well, and we'll polish that off. Then we'll get put in place with magnets and clamps, and we have no way to get to the back side of this, so this is a little bit tricky. There's no access to it because this is closed off. There's an inner panel on the inside. This is common on pickup trucks, Broncos, and so the headliner basically is a steel plate, and then if you have a fabric headliner, it goes up inside that, as is the case on an XLT like this. So yeah, so we'll get this cleaned up, get holes punched in here, and then we're going to put this up in place, line everything up, and then we'll tack weld it in. So here I chucked up a 3/16 drill bit, and I'm going to drill holes in for the welds on the drip rail. So I'm just going to make sure the flange is flat, just very light taps here, just to make sure everything is nice and straight. So now that we have those spot weld holes put in the bottom there, we're going to kind of check to make sure everything is fitting in there. Mostly I'm concerned about that bottom flange having warped when I drilled the holes in it. Everything feels real good. There is a slight curve to all of this, so you don't want it to be, you want it to match that curve perfectly, because if you don't, you'll be paying for it later trying to make the thing look right. And it'll also weld together a whole lot better if everything fits nicely. Because this is no access to the back, I'm using magnets to hold this in place. So I'll get my first spot welds in on the magnets, and then I'll pull the magnets off after. It makes this a little bit tricky. So I'm not going to weld the bottom in here at the drip rail until I have all of this tacked in and pretty much ready to go. That allows us to move a little bit, I think, and it'll, because that gap here, there is a slight gap there, and I'll have to set that up a little better here. So you do need a gap. I don't like too much of a gap. Just from testing pieces, I can get a pretty good, you get an idea of how much gap you need to get good penetration, weld all the way through, and a solid fit. And matter of fact, I do a couple test pieces like this before I weld, typically with the same material, to kind of get the welder set up to where I want it. Gets you back in practice, and probably gives a better result. I'm not a great welder, so a little bit of practice helps me out to make this work out a little better. There's pretty good penetration on this where I welded it, and I'm using the same settings here, the same type of gap and weld. So I just put my first two tack welds in. You can see the magnets on there. So just One of the keys I have learned in doing this is to have patience and go at it slowly. So I'll put another spot in, move my magnets. It's a little bit challenging because it's starting to get windy here today, which makes it a little difficult to do this outdoors. So yeah, I don't have garage space indoors right now, and I've got engine work going on, so I forbid myself from welding any area where I have an open engine. So I'll kind of get a little closer to the corners here, slowly getting her tacked in, and now I'm going to probably get the bottom clamped in, and we'll work on the sides. The magnets probably won't be needed anymore. Well, to do the rest of this, to get the clamp in there, I needed to open the car door, so I need to get a welding blanket out so that I could do that. So I got the welding blanket in place, and then we will put a clamp on the bottom. I'm going to put that on pretty loose because I don't want to change the shape of that bottom piece there, just enough to kind of hold it in place. Everything is still flush here. I don't have any high or low spots. A little bit high there, but there was actually a dent in the roof before we even started right in there. I believe that was at the factory because there was actually just a little bit of filler in that spot. Now, this is lined up pretty well, but I can always use my hammer or a screwdriver or whatever I have to put a little bit of pressure on there to get things to line up as we go, and I can do that either side of the panel. You want to be, and you could also tap on it if you needed to. You only want to do this if you really need to as you go, but it'll help your pieces line up really nicely, and this is right now very even. And as you can tell, I've kind of waited for everything to cool down, so I've got my hammer sitting here ready if I need it. But again, the key is to be patient, go slow, let everything cool down between 1 or 2 spot welds, and it'll come out surprisingly well. So now I have the 2 side spot welds in. Everything is pretty flush, lining up on my drip edge here, and then we'll slowly start stitching this. The bottom spot welds I'm going to do after. These will be butt welds down here on either end. We have small gap all the way around still, so everything's working out pretty well. So I put a couple more spot welds in it. Wait for things to cool down, make sure everything's straight, and we'll put a couple more in there. So far, no signs of any warping. Everything seems to be coming out pretty well. Just waiting for it to cool now, and then we'll put a couple more spot welds in it. A little bit more progress. Now I did discover a thin spot down here I didn't expect, so I had a little bit of blow through. We'll just take our time with that. We'll get that filled in. That's down on this corner down here. Not very worried about that. That'll all work. It's just taking our time and then progressively filling in the spots until it's continuous. So we make a little more progress. Our little trouble spot down here with the hole is pretty much filled in without too much hassle. We may have to spend a little bit of time grinding to get that done well, and we'll just keep at it. I'm at a point now I'm going to take a wire wheel to it and clean it up. I may actually get out my little roll lock sander, the little 2-inch or whatever that is, 1.5 inches, and clean these up, just the tops of it, very lightly. Just so I can get a good look at where I still need to weld it in. So I just took the tops of these off a little bit with the roll lock disc, and very carefully try not to hit the sheet metal at all. So I got this cleaned off with the wire wheel, looking pretty good. And we'll get back to tacking it in. So we got some more welds in it, and we'll clean this up and see where we're at. So clean the high spots off of it a bit just to see what we've got. Wire wheeled it, and we've got just a couple little spots to take care of yet. We'll get them taken care of, and then we'll do it all over again of just, you know, wherever we have to touch up, we'll weld them in, and then I'll crank up the heat and we'll get the spot welds put in. Then everything's seems to be lining up fairly well, and yeah, so on to the next step of just filling in some of these little spots. I've been taking a look at this from different angles. Thought I'd take a shot of that just to see that, yep, there's no warping or anything. I'm sure there's a slight amount, but we should be able to clean all that up, and it should look pretty good by the time we're done. And it will be metal. It's not going to be a bunch of filler or anything in there when we're done. So, even though it's weld-through coating, I want to get it all out of the way so we have good penetration. And then I'm going to put the clamp on. This time it'll be tight. So each one of these, I want to make sure that it's tight. If you have it loose, like this sits right now, you'll just burn through. You're not going to make a spot weld at all. So for each spot weld, what I'll do is I'll clamp it down, and then I'm going to take my hammer and make sure that I'm solid to the surface here, so that they mate really well. If you don't, it will blow through. So I put a couple extra tacks in there. I took care of the welds on the bottom here, and started the process of grinding it down. So I'll take the high spots out of it next and start cleaning it up. I think I still have some spots on the bottom there on the drip rail to take care of, and yeah, we'll go from there. So we're slowly working this down and getting the shape, and basically working down high spots. I got some more tacks to go in there probably, but we're starting to look pretty good. So now I'm gonna go down to a much finer disc, and I'll probably get a grinder with a fine disc on there, and we'll kind of level this out. This is where we've got to be kind of careful we don't get things too thin. Don't have any big pits or gaps in there, so we're looking pretty good. Just got to make sure not to overheat things. Everything's looks like we're pretty good with no warpage. The shape seems to be right. We just got a lot of finish work to do. Cleaning up pretty well, so I'm just using actually I'm at 80 grit on my DA, and cleaning it up. I think I've got a couple little low spots, but it's doing pretty good, and I'll probably have a couple little spots to fill in. But for right now, I'm just going to kind of finish off the part that everybody's going to see, or in the real body work down here, the drip rail. I think I've got some little work to do on that yet, but we're just going to flatten this out nice and flat now with the 80 grit, and see what we've got. And if you look at it from an angle, we don't see any big deals with warpage. The roof's looking pretty good, and that's the big worry on something like this. So we're looking pretty decent on it. So this is what we have with 80 grit on our DA. It's not looking too bad. I'll clean it up real nice with a fiber pad just to see what it's looking like. Right now, just cleaning up with the roll-lock, the fiber pad on a roll-lock disc. Just to clean things up, make sure we don't have any voids. Looking pretty good. And cleaned up the drip rail pretty well here. And, finishing that off. We're getting pretty close to it. Still may have one or two little spots, but there's actually no holes going through. It's just minor voids, depressions in where the weld is. So we're actually doing pretty good on this, and it's still fairly straight. So we'll put a little bit of filler in it, and should come out pretty good. This is what we look like. So it's coming out pretty good. I think once we get, you see a little There's a little deviations in there, but not much. And we'll get some filler in there, and should be ready to go. Need to put her away because weather's coming, and we're in the outdoors. All right, so our next step is just going to be filling it, but we've completed the patch panel and put it together, and we're ready to move on. And we get this thing in primer here real soon. I'll probably put a coat of primer on it tonight.